So in the interest of everybody saying, what about my garden? Let me tell you just right up front, this is not every garden in the United States. Unfortunately, it's only since I've had digital cameras that I've been really focusing on gardens. I had some from way back, but you know, the pictures can't compare with what we can do now. So it isn't every garden, but it's quite a few. So I hope you enjoy the variety that we have today. I'm going to start where we had a presentation a couple of weeks ago going through Pennsylvania, and Hershey Gardens is in Hershey, Pennsylvania, of course, in mid Pennsylvania near Harrisburg and near Gettysburg and the Amish country. And if you've been to Hershey and seen the Hershey factory and their amusement park, you may have seen part of Hershey, but something to see in Hershey is the garden. Mr. Hershey's wife was a big gardener, and so he made this wonderful garden for her. And there are just a few pictures from Hershey, especially like the roses. So there are lots of roses in this garden. And I'm also going to say we're going to go through really quickly because this could take hours if we really talked about every picture that you like. So we're going to look at a lot of pictures of a lot of gardens. And of course, you see a little bit about Hershey. You can tell where you are. And lots of cute features all the way through. Really appeals to children a lot. I was there in the summertime, which of course is nice for the blooming things, the roses, the butterflies, and so forth. And you will see the flowers marked, which is nice. And there's a nice Japanese garden there as well. And if you know anything about Japanese gardens, you know that the bridges are typically like this, not in a straight line, so that the spirits will have more trouble following you. That's the idea of having a bridge that is not in a straight line. Our next garden is also in Pennsylvania, not very far away, closer to Philly, in Kennett Square, Longwood Gardens. And there are several gardens in that area. This one belonged to the DuPont family and was originally built on their home property. And it's especially famous for the fountains. And I tried putting in the video that I had of the fountains. It gets to music with the dancing fountains kinds of things. But that just didn't work this time. For some reason, this particular one has its own mind and it wouldn't let me put a video in. So I'm sorry we didn't have that, but you're going to have to imagine hearing the music and these fountains giving you a nice display. I've been there a couple times, once in fall, twice in fall actually, and once in summer. And of course in fall, it's really beautiful because of the colored trees. If you're used to red leaves, not so much here, but the golden leaves are everywhere in fall, and it's just really a fairyland. Of course, there are some little lakes and lots of different water features and sculptures through the garden, different parts that you can see that are laid out. A really beautiful display. They have a beautiful conservatory as well with a nice water lily pond right next to it. The first time I was there, they were starting to have a flower show. You can see through the windows some of the mums up in the hanging baskets, and we'll see some more of those in just a minute. So they have a nice water lily collection. And then in the conservatory itself, there are different rooms that have different, what do you call them, climates, I guess. This would be a dry climate, a desert climate. And this with the ferns, more moist. And then coming into the main buildings, as I say, they were getting ready for their flower show. So these balls up here are mums that were coming into flowering. Here are some that are in bloom already, but the workmen are still working here. And more mums outside, all varieties and kinds. There's one of the houses in the conservatory that's just for orchids. And of course, I say several buildings on the property, little faux castle up here. And of course, the topiaries, which we were talking about earlier. You see a lot of these in the English gardens. And of course, in summer, there are roses, which are nice. The blue salvia, daylilies. Some of these I have marked, but if you know some flowers that I don't know, I certainly don't know every flower there is. You can alert me. And I don't know the name of this flower. I loved it though, the way it showed up against the black. Another thing I noticed about longwood that got me interested was how they'll use one color or kind of a group of colors that are similar in one spot. And I have a very small garden. I'm in a townhouse. And so using every color in the rainbow just doesn't look good in my little garden. So I like the way they would group colors together, like have an all yellow garden or an all pink and red garden. And the blues and purples I thought were especially attractive. And so if you have a small space, that's something you might want to consider, is to do kind of a color grouping. Really makes it looks nice. And in the conservatory and on the grounds, there are lots of sculptures at Longwood as well. And sometimes you have to look for them. They might be hiding in some of the flower arrangements or flowering plants. This is a little thing about children's gardens, and there are several. At Winterthur, right down the road, it was also a DuPont property. There's a beautiful home that you can go through. And in the spring, it's a wooded property, and has trails all through where you can go hiking. And in spring, there are lots of azaleas and rhododendrons that line the paths. And I'm not really showing any of that. I'm just showing you parts of Winterthur that are suitable for the children. And they're really delightful. The little homes that they have, little houses. I mean, the kids just have so much fun at Winterthur. It's really set up for little kids. And this is another one that's got a lot of tree houses in. This little guy is my grandson several years back. He is now towering over my head at 13. At Dallas, we also have a 7-acre part of it is devoted to the kids. Here he is a little bit bigger, with chessmen and mazes and things that you can eat, water that you can play with, and all kinds of fun things. So this is a preview of Dallas. Also in the area in Trenton, there's the Stuart Johnson Center for the Arts, which is basically a sculpture garden. And what's interesting about the Stuart Johnson Center is that he's taken paintings mainly, like this would be a Matisse painting that you may be familiar with, and made sculptures out of them. And you'll see very famous paintings or photographs that you've seen in the past that are now sculptures. And I know you recognize some of these. The person coming up to it would be about so tall. These are maybe 20 feet tall. And this one too, you remember the photograph at the end of the war in New York with the nurse getting kissed in Times Square. So you'll see these all over, and there are hundreds of these. This would be a Renoir, one of the artists painting, and some of them are just normal people, but they're statues. You think you're going up to someone, and they're actually not. Marilyn Monroe. My daughter, who lives in the area, the mother of the little guy. And there's also plenty of just what we call plain sculpture. There's just hundreds of sculptures in this garden, not so much flowers, but sculptures, and a really interesting one. If you've never been to it and live in that area, you might like it. Here's one that's out in a field. He's a giant, and he also has hands and feet sticking up places. So it's a really interesting garden. The gardens in the south, of course, you want to visit in the spring. There's some of the delphiniums and azaleas blooming outside of Bellingraph. And this is in Mobile, Alabama, if you didn't see it on your screen. It's built, of course, on an estate where somebody had some bucks to spend, and a nice river running through. And you'll see as we get in the back, they're on a swamp. So lots of azaleas and spring flowers. And of course, that's when I plan to be in the southern gardens. As you see, these are not as good quality. They're from farther back in my photographing career. But along the banks of their river, it's really a beautiful view. And they do have a nice Japanese garden there as well, and a greenhouse where they can grow orchids and other exotic things. So here's one of the pictures from their Japanese garden, and a second one. So this is out in back where they have kind of a swamp area. And this isn't meant to be a Japanese bridge necessarily, but it does wander around through the swamp so that you can see the wildlife there. Charleston's not theoretically a garden, but it was in bloom when I was there. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of what was, you can't see this down here. It is there you go, tulip magnolia. They are some of the first trees that bloom. You notice the bare branches on the other trees. So it is a magnolia, but people got into the spirit of spring very early with their window boxes and of course the dogwoods that were already in bloom. So my point of going to Charleston, of course, was to visit some of the plantations, and this is one of them, Magnolia Plantation. There are several others. They're in a swampland as well. So you see the cypress trees growing in the water and the Spanish moss hanging down. The home, of course, is a nice southern plantation with a big porch that you can imagine yourself being out here on a hot summer day, because that was pre-air conditioning. Of course, the spring gardens are camellias and azaleas. And statuary was in the garden, and I thought that this crane, who never moved, was a statue. And then I was walking away and saw him walking off. So this was a real live bird. Kind of icky water. If you planned on swimming in it, I wouldn't think of that. So the woodland was in the early flowers with the daffodils and some of the early.
Now, which garden is this?
This is Magnolia Plantation outside of Charleston.
Oh, okay.
South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina. And the Charleston Flower Show was on. I didn't think the flower show was that great, but I loved the dresses. So I wanted to show you that. Ginter Garden in Richmond was on my way from one daughter to another daughter one year, and I stopped in Richmond. I loved the way the garden was laid out. It had some wonderful things in it, particularly a conservatory, which we don't have in Dallas. But the show of colors was a little on the rare side. I'm used to Dallas with these show of thousands of blooms. Ginter really doesn't have that. It does have a nice greenhouse, I say, with sculptures and orchids and so forth. You've seen the hydrangeas last week or 2 weeks ago, so I'm not going to belabor the fact that there's this wonderful azalea garden in Birmingham if you get there. And it's a nice place to visit. There are walking trails through it. It's a number of acres, I think 27 acres, something like that. And it's full of hydrangeas in the spring, so that's a nice place to visit. Another woodland garden is Hot Springs, Arkansas. And again, not a lot of color, but their flower show in the spring, in the fall, had a few little places along the way in the garden that you could stop. And of course, some views of the lake that's nearby. Butterfly World in Coconut Creek, this is a suburb of Fort Lauderdale. And they really catered to the plants that were attractive to butterflies. So there were lots of butterflies in the area. And they did have some plants growing inside as well, and some birds that were captured there. A little lake running through. One of the things they grew there was passion flowers. This was from a sign, and some of the real ones. They're kind of an exotic flower, and a jack in a pulpit. One of the little birds that was roaming around in the enclosed area. And if you're in Florida, of course, you're going to see bougainvillea everywhere. Going now to 2 Japanese tea gardens, one in San Francisco, and you'll see where the next one is. So Japanese gardens are mainly green. They have some bridges, of course, and they have just pops of color. They're not full of color. You'll just see that little bit now and then. Of course, the maples will bloom, or not, they don't bloom, but they have red leaves for about a month in spring and about a month in fall. So they're always nice to give you a little color, but lots of statuary, water. This one, these cranes were statues. They did not move. I like the blue and the green and the reflections in this one. But you will see Japanese buildings or some facsimile thereof. And the maples, of course, were in bloom in San Francisco. Here's your sort of bonsai. It's regular size, but trimmed off to be very proper. A little Dutch iris by the pond. So again, these little bits of color in the grasses and little flowers here and there. Another type of grass, Japanese garden, is the raked stones and some azaleas in bloom. The second Japanese garden I wanted to show you was in Fort Worth. And you may not think of Fort Worth as having anything Japanese particularly, but this, if you're not familiar with it, this particular spot used to be a ravine where people threw used tires down and all their trash. And one day the judge said, no, you can't do that anymore. This has got to be cleared out. And so the movers and shakers in Fort Worth got together and cleaned that ravine out and put in a Japanese garden. They had a consultant come from Japan who laid it out. And it is now very small, but it's a thing of beauty. And you can come any time of the year. As I say, mostly greenery. Lake, this little ravine has now got a pond in it full of koi, huge koi that love to be fed. Statuary, it has a few buildings in it. And of course, we have these little pops of color. The maples and some azaleas here and there, and a few colors in the spring that are really nice. This sort of mimics the Japanese bridge. You don't want your stones to be in a row or the spirits will get after you. So this is what some of the flowers look like in spring. This one on the right is I'm going to forget it. A crabapple. I'm sorry, crabapple. And they're just huge little clumps of flowers. I'm not sure about the one on the left. It looks from here, maybe it's a red bud. Red and white red buds in the background. But a lovely place that you can walk through it in 15, 20 minutes. It's not expensive. And now for something totally different, a desert garden. There are two wonderful gardens outside of Tucson. One is the Arizona-Sonora Desert Museum, which is in fact a desert garden. The other one we'll come to in a minute. And if you think this is just cactus, actually cactus can be very colorful as well. And there are lots of flowers that will bloom in a dry climate. And we see the saguaro cactus and this Sonoran desert kind of view from the desert garden. So cactus bloom too. And the hummingbirds know where to find things that they want to eat. Here's a pincushion cactus. And the other park that is nearby is a Saguaro National Park. In fact, it's in two sections. This is the visitor center at the main section. And the saguaro cactus, of course, are protected by law. I saw not too long ago that someone had chopped one down. These plants live for hundreds of years. And as one breaks off, you see some little arms will grow out in another direction. So they're a protected species. And they don't grow in many places, but the Sonoran Desert is one of them. So this is what you will see in this park. Another cactus that I enjoy is the choyo. And you notice the LL, if you're not familiar with the Spanish, is pronounced as a Y. So it's choyo cactus. And they look like they're nice and sweet and fuzzy, but they're not. They're prickly. They are prickly. They are really cactus. Another kind of blooming cactus. I don't know the name of this one. And in this garden, there are also petroglyphs. So there were Indians living in this area that have left their paintings for us, so to speak. Tohono Chula is not really a garden. It's a former home that's now a little restaurant. You can eat breakfast or brunch in their patio, which is nice, but it's full of plants. And I've only included a few because of the time consideration, but it had this nice choya cactus that the sun just comes through and they look like they're fuzzy, but as you come up close, you see that they're really just prickles. But they make a nice backdrop with the mountains and the desert scenery behind it. So going to Hawaii, again, a complete change. Hawaii is just one big garden. You could just put a fence around the whole thing and say it's a garden. And this, of course, is bougainvillea that is invasive to the extent that it just covers everything along the roads. And the palms, of course, are beautiful. This is from one of the native Polynesian or native Hawaiian parks that are along the beach in the Big Island. I wanted to show you the Ohia lehua tree, which is the state flower. And they look like they're little fuzzy, I don't know, what would you call them? Little fans kind of that bloom up in the trees, not to be confused with the African tulip. And at a distance, they look a lot alike. But when you see an African tulip, one that's fallen to the ground, of course, this would be on lava rock, they're pretty big. They're about the size of a teacup. And they're a pretty sturdy little flower. So the Hawaiian Islands, of course, are volcanic and they are very rich in soil. And as these volcanoes erupted out of the sea, and of course, coming from sea bottom, they are the tallest volcanoes, the tallest mountains on our planet. But only a portion of them is above the surface. They are very rich in minerals, and it's easy to see that flowers would grow easily in these volcanic soil. There was nothing growing on when the first Polynesians came, and they brought seeds. So now the, quote, native plants to Hawaii were in fact brought by the Polynesian. They weren't there to begin with. But there are many other plants that were brought from other countries. And in some cases, they have really found a home in Hawaii and have become invasive. So we'll talk about some of those in just a minute. It's interesting to see what we call exotic flowers for 3 bunches for $5. This is ginger and some of the heliconias. So it's nice to have these exotic flowers being so cheap. And I love these floral arrangements. The tea leaves are what has wrapped around the bottom of it, but the anthurium people have growing as hedges in their yards. Some of the ginger and mother-in-law tongue, orchids, making beautiful flowers. I've lost how much those were, but I know they were very cheap as well. These are the anthurium close-up. One of the wonderful gardens to visit in Hawaii is the tropical garden in Hilo on the Big Island. And it's set on a bay, on Anomea Bay, and it comes up to a peak on this side. So we're looking at the 2 lovers who were lost here in the rocks. But as you come in, you start at the top and work your way down into this valley alongside this bay. And there are all these tropical flowers that just are everywhere. And there are a number of heliconias, different kinds. This is another kind of heliconia that we're familiar with, the bird of paradise. And here are some of our gingers. Now, the Indonesian ginger is the one that has become so invasive. And they won't really let you bring in any kind of plant into Hawaii, as you can imagine. The climate there is between 75 and 85 all year round, and everything grows there. So it does become invasive pretty quickly. Our tour guide on the Big Island, who took us on a nature walk, has pulled up one of these invasive gingers that we would love to have in our garden just as a specimen plant, because they're pretty, but they do take over everything. Another variety is the red ginger, and another the Tahitian ginger.
Are any of those the edible? I mean, when you eat ginger root?
I don't know. I don't know that. I would think so, but I wouldn't know what part of it you'd use. Maybe the bulb?
Oh yeah, in the ground.
Yeah, let me go back to that one and see what he's got in his hand. I don't know if you can tell if any of that would be a bulb that would be what we see as ginger in the store.
Yeah, I don't know.
I can't tell. They also, you see this fence along here. I didn't mention they have feral pigs also that were dropped off by Captain Cook. That and chickens. You see lots of chickens, particularly in Maui. But Captain Cook, on his way past the Hawaiian Islands, dropped off pigs and chickens. And again, they had no predators, so they are everywhere. So in order to protect some of their plants, they have put up fences, and you'll see the ruts along here where the pigs have come trying to get in. So yeah, Hawaiian is interesting in their flowers and in their wildlife. And this, of course, a croton would be a little house plant for us. As you see, this is mucho large. There's a lovely waterfall in this garden too that I didn't, I've cut so many pictures out of here, I've forgotten what I've cut out. There are lots of orchids. Of course, they grow wild in Hawaii, hundreds of varieties. This, of course, we would get a lei of these Catalia orchids if it's your first time to Hawaii. And after that, you get, not the nice kind. We see these in wedding bouquets a lot, the Stephanotis. And lots of these orchids will have in the center some, like they look like little monkeys or little faces and things like that. There are all kinds of them. And there's statuary in this garden too. This would be a Polynesian or a native Hawaiian god, the ku. And you see the banyan trees as well. And they're growing around the state capitol in Lahaina, which is interesting. I'm sorry, not in Hawaii. They're in Lahaina too, around I guess the city hall, I guess is where it is, but the banyan trees are also around the state capitol in Honolulu. And the roots come so far out of the ground, they can twist into all kinds of shapes. On the island of Kauai, there's an interesting garden called the Na'aina Kai Garden. And it's a variety of lots of things. This was a small sculpture. It was maybe 3 feet high or so. Lots of whimsical things. They have lots of tour groups that come through here, especially the children's groups. And this couple has started this garden about 30 or 40 years ago, and they planted in whole orchards of different Hawaiian fruits and nuts, but also lots of sculptures and different kinds of plants. And then we'll see a little bit something that they've done a little bit later. The plumeria, of course, is common in Hawaii. You see the women with the plumeria in their hair. There's ponds and waterfalls, and this was prolific on Kauai. The rainbow shower tree, which were along all the roads, were really pretty. This is what they built, a whole village of different places. Like this would be the Hawaiians, but they also had the Texans or pioneers, and maybe from the Arctic countries. And there were dozens of these. I just showed you a couple of them just to give you a sample. So the tour groups would come through to see all this. It was a large place and really interesting. So if you're in Kauai, you might want to try finding that one. And of course, I'm from Dallas. So here is my prize garden. I feel like it's my own personal property. I have a membership and I go many times a year if at all possible. This is at the entranceway and into the first entrance patio that you will see. And this is a hall, which if you have a wedding there, and of course there are many weddings there, you might want to have your reception in there and a gift shop off to the left. And around this corner, there's an outdoor restaurant, a little patio, and looking across White Rock Lake, you will see the downtown skyline, if you can see that. And this has been changed up a little bit lately, where they have put in some new things. So I'm going to, someone disappeared. Let me go back a minute. No? Okay, it's coming. I wanted to show you some of the features of the Arboretum. I include it not only because it's in my hometown, but it is always listed in one of the top 10 gardens in the world. So we are so lucky to have this garden in Dallas. It was donated by the DeGolyer family and their neighbors, who combined had about 67 acres that they donated first to SMU. When White Rock Lake was back in the 20s, the water supply for Dallas, and it was out in the country. So this is the DeGolyer home, a large, I think it's something like 30,000 square feet, which sounds impossible, but it just seems to go on forever and ever. Very plain on the outside, but since it's been landscaped now, it doesn't look so plain, but it's in the Spanish style. Mr. DeGolyer was an oil man who ended up with lots of money and built this beautiful home in the Spanish style, as I say, and with a lovely library overlooking the lake and lots of flowers and trees. So it was originally an arboretum. He kind of collected trees. Now there are a couple of restaurants there as well. And you can have a garden, you can have a wedding there, you can have different events there. Our most recent addition to the Arboretum is called the Tasteful Garden. This building back here also is good for lots of things, parties and so forth. You can have weddings in various locations at the Arboretum, this little lake. These plants that you see along here are vegetables. And so what they do in their little stand here is they cook up these vegetables for you as they become ripe and ready to eat, and give you samples of what you can grow in your garden in Dallas that's edible. And so it is a tasteful garden. There are lots of little gardens like this, a little parterre with a planting in it. There's a statue up at the top of this, which doesn't appear in this picture. The woman's garden, another enclosed garden. And there, as I say, there are lots of weddings and pictures being taken in the garden, and also of the girls' quinceañeras, which would be the 15th birthday. So you'll see girls in their beautiful ball gowns being photographed out here. And the frames, of course, are wonderful to frame your friends in, or your wedding party. A little place where you can gather and have lunch and look at the lake. They have a nice concert venue in the summertime. Once a week they have music here. You bring your wine and your cheese or your lunch picnic basket and hear bands. There are statues everywhere. These 4 toads are fountains coming at the end of an alleyway that we'll see of crepe myrtles. And of course the kids love those. They love to play in the water, and they can there, but there are water features throughout the garden and lots of sculptures. We also have trial gardens, again, to let us know what grows well in Dallas and what doesn't. So we have those, and our native flower, our state flower, the bluebonnet. This is the fern garden, and it has ferns in it and things that need to be a little dampened down. I think this must have been during one of our spring flower shows. There's lots of people in the garden. So you'll see the moisture that these misters go on to mist these flowers every once in a while. So we're going to go now a little bit through the seasons, and behind Kathleen is spring, but they start with the spring flowers, and I usually go 2 or 3 times in the spring because they don't last very long and the next group come along. So you definitely want to be there early to see the flowering trees and the forsythia, and they're absolutely glorious, of course. We have different kinds of red buds, different kinds of fruit trees, dogwoods, and azaleas. So a typical garden right now, they'd be planting these pansies for our winter flowers. We do have flowers all year round. So some of you who live with snow on the ground, eat your heart out. I love to send an eat your heart out picture like this to my friends in Ottawa, Canada, about February, where they're still barely out of the house, where they can see through the snowbank. So basically they will plant the pansies first and some of the bulbs. So the hyacinths will come up first, and then the daffodils, and then the tulips. And sometimes you will see them all at once, but they plant them in staggered planting so that they do last longer. And they do a spring flower show. And I have thousands of these, so I'm not going to bore you with all of them, but some of the color combinations are interesting. You see the different ones coming up all together as more are in bloom. But there are literally hundreds of thousands of flowering bulbs in the spring. Next to bloom, of course, are going to be the azaleas. And I'm really teasing you with these pictures because they have replaced these azaleas that are so magnificent in spring with some that bloom all year round, but they're not quite as showy as these. This is on my background. So now we do have azaleas all year round, but they're not quite as nice. And another color in the wisteria, the white, this wisteria. And they do special shows. As I say, the spring flower show is one of them, where you'll see something like this, and then they'll repurpose that same guy a little bit later and make something else out of him, which is true with lots of little houses we have and lots of this kind of statuary. So you might go to this spring flower show. Here we have different artists, and we've had Picasso and Monet and so forth, or different authors, or different kinds of tree houses. This is a tree house. Or this one that's been around to several other gardens. I know my friend in Huntsville has seen the peacocks with the garden of pansies in the back and different flowers. So some of them I know travel to other gardens. And of course, we've had chihuly, and I know some of you have have had Chihuly glass as well. And while this garden was, the Chihuly is exhibit in our garden a few years back, we had one of our rare ice storms, a spring storm where we had hail coming down in a swath across Dallas, right across the Arboretum. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what about all that glass that's out there in the garden? One of the petals on this one broke, and that was all it was broken of the Chihuly glass in the ice storm. I couldn't believe it. And of course, it's beautiful to look at. We've also had artists from Zimbabwe coming and working in our garden, sculptures, and a bunch of their sculptures around. In summer, of course, we go to our summer flowers. And the gardeners at the Arboretum pull out the old stuff and put in the new. So we have these flashy gardens, just acres and acres of beautiful flowers. We're right on the line of peonies. South of us, we can't grow peonies, and north of us, we can. I know we had them in Detroit when I lived in Detroit, but some people south of the Arboretum can't grow peonies. It gets to be too warm here. They like a colder climate. But of course, they do magic, I think, with the flowers at the Arboretum. Roses don't bloom very well in Dallas either, but of course, they do roses. One of the nice things about the Arboretum, if you want to donate, your children or someone can give you a birthday gift. My little flower bed was like this big for 3 months, and it has my name on it.
Oh.
So this was one of the nicer gifts I have gotten from my children on my 80th birthday. Thank you, thank you.
Wow.
So I say there are lots of weddings. This is one of the venues. There's a garden back behind where I'm standing, which is nice to put white chairs in. So there are lots of weddings in different places. Fall is a magic time too, because there are thousands of pumpkins. And you never knew there were this many varieties of pumpkins till you come to the Arboretum in fall. And this is from this year's Pumpkin Village. It changes a little bit every year. Again, repurposing various things, but you'll see all the different varieties of pumpkins and little houses made out of them. This is like a Cinderella carriage with the horses made of clay, hay rather. But look at all the varieties there are. And who knew there were that many different kinds? But they make a colorful show, and the pumpkins line the walkways through the gardens. This is where our toads were down here, and these are crepe myrtle trees. They've already lost their blooms here. And late in the day, you get some nice shadows and pretty pictures of the pumpkins. And they go well with mums, of course. And some of the statuary, again, here's our faux artist who is doing a little painting across White Rock Lake. And the sculpture is beautiful at different times of the year with different flowers in this planting bed near the DeGoyer house. The candle trees are a fall flower as well. One of the newer additions to the garden a few years ago in another ravine was to plant some of the Japanese maples. And as I said earlier, they come into color about a month in the spring and a month in the fall. And I have one in my little courtyard. But I like to go in the fall to make sure that I see the maples. Another fall blooming is the Michaelmas daisy with this big sweep of them along here. And more varieties of mums. Again, late in the day, people just leaving before dusk. There's a place that along this curve that shows you what grows well in Dallas also. Some of the dry area plants that we can grow, like some of these back here. And if you were with us, was it last week before? I showed you some of the 12 days of Christmas that we have in the winter. This is one of the 12 pavilions for the 12 days of Christmas during the day. If you go at night, you see something like this. You see the partridge in the pear tree for the first one. And at night, they're all lit with lights, and they are all moving on a little turntable. And they're really beautiful at night during the winter time. But you can see them during the day, of course, as well. And these are set up during the Christmas pageant, show, whatever you want to call it, Christmas show. Here's the DeGolier house lit at night. And usually this is open at Christmas time. They have huge collections of creches, of Christmas trees, of nutcrackers, ornaments, all kinds of Christmas decorations, and they change them out every year. Dolls, and it's nice to go in at Christmas and look at those. And of course, this year, because of COVID, it was not open. This is another picture from last week. So with that, I'm going to let you get out of the Dallas area and say goodbye over White Rock Lake to our skyline and say goodnight.
Wow. Well, you know, that was amazing, Mary. One of the very interesting things at the Arboretum is that, you know, they will change out whole beds.
Yes, they do.
But they do it at night so that you don't see it happen. It's always all these flowers in big bloom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a magnificent place. I've been to some of the others, you know, the really famous gardens around the world. And this really is one of the top ones. So if you're ever in Dallas, make sure you spend at least half a day there. Now, seeing the garden at night at Christmas, you're not going to see any flowers. And actually, they had not planted the beds. It's the first time I've not seen planted beds. Like you're talking about, there's always something in the beds. And they're huge beds, and there are thousands of bulbs. I mean, we're not talking just a few. We're talking about 30,000 at a time. So they're just a knockout. It really is a beautiful place to be.
Well, and I was thinking, as you went through all those different gardens, we have Evergreen members that live nearby.
Yes, we do. I've stayed with some of them to see these.
Well, yeah. I mean, even in Hawaii and Kauai, we have Evergreen members. Yeah. So, you know, if you're going from here to there and there's a garden in between, look for an Evergreen member and maybe add an extra day to your trip.
I want to mention, if I could, for a moment, the garden that she showed us in Maui, the Kauai. We were there for 5 hours.
I was too.
5 hours. It was a 240 acre place, and it's huge, and it's astonishing. But I mean,
well, almost all of these, I have hundreds of pictures from them. I have literally thousands of pictures from the Dallas Arboretum since I live here. Well, so just to pick out a few, it's just, okay, I'm going to cut this one, cut this one, cut this one. And so, yeah, it's really difficult to cut it down to a manageable size. I don't know if you counted how many there were, but there were 20 gardens in this. And we just whipped right through them. And as you say, you can spend 5 hours in any of them, really.
Well,
okay, Florence.
Grounds for Sculpture, I'm a member, and it's near me, and it's my hangout place.
Yes,
and Longwood Gardens is also a hangout place. Yeah. And you touched, your presentation was exquisitely beautiful. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Really magnificent.
Yeah.
You can tell I'm a garden lover.
Yeah, well.
So Jackie,
I like the variety in this, and I know it's not the Japanese garden or the Rose Garden in Portland, and it's not the garden in St. Louis, and you know, there's so many more, but I don't always have good photographs that said these are really from the digital time on, because others are on slides, they're on prints that are not the quality of these. Even like Bellingrath is not the quality of pictures that I got last week. So you can tell. I did my best to spruce them up, but some of them are just not that good.
May I ask Mary a question? With the tulips, I know I live in South Carolina. If we don't pull up our tulips after they bloom and die down, and plant them in the fall, they will not continue to grow. They'll get smaller and smaller. Yeah. What do they do in Texas?
They assume they're annuals.
Yeah. Do they replant them every year?
Yep, they do. Now, I'm from Wisconsin, and we had tulips, and of course, we just left them in the ground. They came up every year.
Yeah, but that was
you can't do that in the South. No, they have to have the cold winter. They may put them in cold storage, but I've been told that they just consider them to be annuals and they replant every year.
Do they have people who?
Jackie?
Yeah, they have a lot of them.
Can I say something?
Yes.
Holland, Michigan is famous for their tulip festival.
Yes.
Has anyone ever been? And
I
if
have.
you come here the first week of May, the whole town is in bloom with tulips.
Yes,
Millions.
and they're then
literally
too.
millions. And the city, all the ones planted along the streets in the city and in the parks,
Yes.
they dig up every fall. And then they sell the bulbs, like a big
Oh, really?
5-gallon pail
Yeah.
for $10.
Yeah.
And they replant every year so they get that lush full bloom.
Yeah, I have been there.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
We're going to be doing Cincinnati in a couple of weeks, and they have a nice little garden too. I didn't try to, and some bonsai, by the way. I didn't try to include it here since it's going to be in the Cincinnati one, because we already had so many.
Jackie, could you, so you wrote that you had a suggestion for what that white flower that was one of the first slides, but
The one with the big, the black with the curved. You know what that is?
Well, I think it's a gooseneck loosestrife, and its Latin name is Lysimachia clethroides.
I'll go with the loose stripe.
I think. Check it, Mary, and see, Google it and see if that looks like the same flower.
Okay, I will.
But
Thank you.
yeah, it's a pretty one.
Gooseneck loose stripe. That's
I
interesting.
think so.
Yeah, it didn't have a name on it. I would like to have known what it was when I saw it, because I knew I took a nice picture of it, but I didn't have the name, and I've not been able to find the name of it. Thank you.
okay.